Hello everyone, welcome back to Mental Health Media. Today we're diving deep into the Dark Souls series, but this time from a slightly different perspective. We're going to be exploring the theme of generational trauma, which is a complex and often overlooked aspect of storytelling. Specifically, we'll unravel the tragic saga of the Lordran royal family, Gwyn, Gwyndolin, Guinevere, and the nameless third son, who we meet later on in the series. This family's story is a powerful metaphor for the cycles of trauma that can run through generations. If this exploration of the Dark Souls universe and series resonated with you, please subscribe for more content on how gaming intersects with mental health. Your support helps us continue these important discussions and bring them to the masses. Part 1. Gwyn and the Cycle of Trauma. Let's start with Gwyn, the Lord of Light and the ruler of Lordran. His reign sort of sets the stage for the generational trauma that unfolds throughout the series. Gwyn's fear of the dark and the age of man led him to link the first flame, an act that echoes through time, becoming a cycle repeated by his descendants for thousands of years. We actually don't know how long. Entire civilizations rise and fall during this time, and many times over, as seen by the third game. This decision to link the fire, despite its impending natural fade, can be seen as an allegory for the denial and the suppression of trauma, forcing a cycle that his lineage struggles to break free from, again, for many generations, not just the most recent iteration. Gwyn's oldest son rebelled. It's unclear exactly what he did. There is some item description text in the first game that suggests that he stole the annals. The annals are like historical documents or like records of some kind. So maybe in doing so, that was a crime obviously great enough to get himself exiled, which sort of epitomizes that consequence of breaking away from the familial expectations and norms. All indicators point to that nameless king, that oldest son, being the heir to the throne, being someone who was expected to succeed Gwyn once Gwyn dies, and maybe to carry on this whole linking of the fire, no longer is the case. That's how grievous that particular act was. He was exiled, and in Dark Souls 3 in particular, it shows the impact of this rejection and the pain of being erased from history. I mean, you can tell in parts of the game, his statues that we all agree are supposed to depict this nameless king, this oldest son, are torn down or damaged in some way. And in fact, that's where you obtain a lightning spell in the first game, which again is a spell directly from Gwyn, which shows that, you know, aside from this one thing that the oldest son did, he was set up to succeed. I mean, he had Gwyn's spells, he had Gwyn's sort of signature look. He was a knight, we know that. It's interesting that one mistake, one rebelling action caused him to be exiled to a faraway place, and it's very interesting. So his rebellion and Gwyn's response to that, how that trauma can persist when dialogue and understanding are replaced by this sort of denial and erasure. And it's interesting to me as well, the way that this plays out, because this is a Japanese story, and I talk about this in a lot of my videos, where the Japanese have a different concept of individuality and societal pressure than we do in the West. Someone akin to, while we have fears of things that terrorize us, the Japanese are always fighting this conflict of individual liberty, of being your own person against what society expects from you. And often the societal evil, the societal overarching rule base leaves a lot of people suffering. And you can see that in this story as well, because not even is the royal family spared from this societal pressure, as we can see by the overall crumbling of the Lordran house based on, I would say, over adherence to outdated principles. And we'll explore that a little bit further in the video as well. Hey guys, before we continue unraveling the story together, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. How do you interpret the actions of Gwyn and his impact on not just his family, but the world as a whole? I'd love to see you discuss this in the comments below. And if you appreciate this, deep dive into the lore of Dark Souls as it pertains to mental health, please consider supporting the channel by liking and sharing this video with someone who you think would be interested. Part 2. Gwyndolин's Struggle and Identity. Next up, let's delve into the story of Gwyndolin, the youngest son of Gwyn. Gwyndolin's life is a tale of identity conflict and familial obligation. He was associated with the moon, which is a symbol of female magic in Lordran, and as such, Gwyndolin was raised as a daughter, which is a decision that reflects the rigidity of gender roles and expectations in their society. This upbringing reminds me of, out here in the States, horror movies like Sleepaway Camp, but set in a high fantasy world, which reveals the deep-rooted issues of identity suppression and the trauma that it can cause. Gwyndolин's story, in my opinion, is just absolutely heartbreaking. He's thrust into this role that he never asked for, with his sister Guinevere leaving Lordran to pursue her own life with the flame god Flynn, as we can see in Dark Souls 2 and further in Dark Souls 3. Gwyndolin is really the only one left to maintain the illusion of a kingdom that has long been crumbling. This responsibility was thrust upon him due to the traditional expectations and the abandonment of his siblings. And that reflects how generational trauma often falls on the shoulders of those least prepared or willing to bear it, or in Gwyndolин's case, least able to escape it, because he did not have the ability to just leave like his sister, and he was not exiled like his oldest brother. He was literally the only one left when his father, Gwyn, as what he believes, died. This struggle is poignant, and it's a reflection of the burdens that familial legacy can impose, often leading to a life spent in the shadows of this unattainable expectation. What's also interesting to note is that the same familial and societal expectations that suggested that Gwyndolin has to be raised as a girl, even though identified as a boy, the same ones that suggested that because there's no one left, he should be passed over until he's the last resort. Those same familial obligations are the ones suggesting and almost demanding of Gwyndolin to stay around and to keep the illusion of Lordran going, which is so interesting because we feel often the most indebted to the people who have traumatized us the most in life. And I'm talking about family, parents, but also relationships, spouses, friends. We often develop this nature of what's right and wrong, not based on what's right for us, but based on what is right for the group as a whole. And sometimes we find that the group as a whole does not represent what we want as individuals. And when that happens, you'll lead to a lot of turmoil. And as I can imagine, you can see in the cutscenes in the game, Gwyndolin is miserable doing what he does. And I am more than certain he's a bit resentful as well. And so it's fascinating to see how the level of depth that this particular part of the story has, even for being a completely missable part of the game. You can run through the game just like I did your first 2 times blind and not know anything about this storyline or any of this. It's very well hidden in the game. And so it's fascinating in that way. Part 3. The Cycle of the Flame and Generational Burdens. The cycle of linking the first flame in the Dark Souls universe is a profound metaphor for the persistence of generational trauma. Each cycle, each attempt to link the flame, represents the ongoing struggle to confront and heal from our past wounds. This cycle shows how trauma, when not addressed, I think this is seen best in Dark Souls 2, which takes place in Drangleic, several thousands of years, I believe, after the events of Dark Souls 1. And the souls of Gwyn and Nito and Seath and the Witch of Izalith found their way into this new land of Drangleic, and they were picked up by powerful people, but they became all the more powerful, ultimately turned and corrupted themselves into versions of the original holder of the soul. You can see the Iron King closely resembling this burnt out version of Gwyn, being obsessed with iron and fire. You can see the Rotten, who was a healer at one point, become obsessed with death, and obviously necromancy probably came with that to some degree, even though it's not explicitly mentioned. You can see the Duke of Seldora obtained Seath's soul, and I believe actually his pet obtained Seath's soul, either way being that close to it. He gained immense thirst for knowledge and ambition. He basically became a giant Slytherin, which is what Seath is in many ways. So as you can see, this reflects even more strongly, in my opinion, the Japanese concept in storytelling of retaining one's identity, or in this case, failing to retain one's own identity in the face of external pressures and external things trying to pull you away from that. And I agree with the Japanese here. I think there's nothing scarier than not knowing who you are, losing who you are, and assimilating into the environment around you, a la Pulse from 2001, which was just a terrifying movie as well. But I digress. So this cycle also parallels the real-life concept of carrying the weight of family expectations and secrets, unresolved issues. Each character in the Lordran royal family, from Gwyn all the way down to Gwyndolin, illustrates a different aspect of this burden. Gwyn's fear and denial, the exile of his eldest son, Gwyndolin's forced identity, and Guinevere's stressed out abandonment all contribute to a legacy of pain and unresolved conflict, but are also so relatable. I challenge you to find a single person in the world who doesn't relate to at least one of those people in the royal family. You can't do it. This game also challenges players to break this cycle, which presents it as this sort of overwhelming task that requires immense strength and understanding. And it's a call to action, not just within the game, but outside of the game in our own lives, to do the hard thing and confront and heal from the traumas that bind us to the past and prevent them from defining our future. To sum it all up, the story of the Lordran royal family in the Dark Souls series is a powerful narrative about generational trauma and the struggle to break free from it. It's a tale that resonates deeply with many of us as we navigate our own family histories and the burdens they carry. Through this analysis, I hope you've gained a deeper understanding of the complex themes in Dark Souls and how they reflect our own battles with past traumas. As we close this chapter out, remember that while the journey to healing is challenging, it's also filled with hope, the possibility of change, and the sweet reward of victory. Thank you for joining me in this exploration. If you found this analysis enlightening, please consider subscribing or commenting your thoughts below for more deep dives into the world of gaming and its impact on our lives. And if you're passionate about uncovering the deeper meanings in games and their connection to our mental and emotional health, don't forget to subscribe and share. Your support helps bring these important discussions to a wider audience. All right, until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep healing.